The light in the grand chamber of the Xylo's conclave was always dim, a perpetual twilight filtered through crystalline strata quarried from the heart of a dead star. It was a light that held history, that seemed to absorb sound and cast long, judgmental shadows from the monolithic thrones arranged in a silent, accusatory circle. At the chamber's heart, a swirling holographic projection of the galaxy pulsed with a sickly, crimson tide, an infection spreading through the void along trade routes and hyperlanes they had once believed were arteries of peace. The silence was a physical weight, heavier than the armored hulls of the warships that stood vigil in the void above. Each of the assembled delegates, Praetor Vorlag of the Xylos, ancient and stoic, his chitinous form a sculpture of patient grief. General Kalen of the Kalish, a being of sinew and volcanic rock, his rage a palpable heat in the cold air. Emissary Lyra of the Luminians, whose body was a mere vessel for a consciousness of pure, shimmering light, felt the oppressive weight of a history they had all sworn was finished. Praetor Vorlag's multifaceted eyes, each lens a universe of sorrow, remained fixed on the spreading stain in the hologram. He remembered the last war. He remembered the screams that echoed not in sound, but in the sterile telemetry of dying worlds. He remembered the scourge, the all-consuming tide of self-replicating biomechanical horrors that had very nearly extinguished every flicker of intelligent life in the spiral arm. They had fought it. They had bled for a century, sacrificing entire fleets, sterilizing whole systems to push it back into the abyss from which it had come. They had won. Or so their monuments, scattered across 100 worlds, proclaimed. The beacon of unity at Cygnus X1, the centerpiece of their victory, was meant to be an eternal flame celebrating their resilience. Now it seemed it had become a funeral pyre for their hubris. It is the same pattern. General Kalen's voice was a grinding of tectonic plates, a sound that promised violence. The same vector of infection, the same biosignatures. Our forefathers bled worlds dry to end this threat. They scoured it from the galaxy. How has it returned? He gestured a massive, stone-like appendage at the hologram, his frustration causing motes of incandescent dust to drift from his form. Our sentinels report the same silent advance. Worlds do not cry for help. They simply go dark. One cycle, a thriving colony. The next, nothing but the echo of their own comm signals and a rising energy signature that speaks its name. Emissary Lyra's light form shimmered, a soft, ethereal chime resonating through the chamber. The pattern is not identical, General. It is more precise, more focused. The last war was a wildfire, spreading erratically. This is a scalpel, cutting with purpose. It is re-emerging from the very places we believed were cleansed, coalescing around the sites of its greatest defeats. Her voice was not sound, but a direct thought transmission, laced with a calm that belied the terror of her words. It moves as if it is being guided or summoned. Vorlag shifted, the ancient plates of his carapace scraping against the obsidian of his throne. The sound was like the sigh of a dying mountain. We were arrogant, he stated, his voice a dry rustle of ancient leaves. We celebrated a victory over a foe we never truly understood. We built monuments to our strength when we should have been building laboratories to our ignorance. We did not kill the scourge. We merely scattered it, made it dormant. A plague reduced to spores, waiting for the right conditions to bloom once more. Then we shall scatter it again, Kalen boomed, rising from his seat. Our fleets are stronger now than they were at the war's end. Our weapons technology has advanced. We will meet this tide with a wall of fire and shatter it back into dust. Will we? Lyra's essence pulsed with a gentle, questioning blue. The Great War drained the resources of 1,000 worlds. The Grand Reconstruction has taken every ounce of our collective will and energy for the last 2 centuries. Our fleets are formidable, yes, but they are also the guardians of a fragile peace, a peace we cannot afford to shatter. Another war of attrition like the last one, it would not matter who won. The galaxy that remained would be a husk. A profound stillness settled over the chamber again, the truth of Lyra's words extinguishing the fire of Kalen's certainty. They were powerful, yes, but they were also tired. Their civilization was an old one, scarred and weary. The crimson stain on the map was not just a strategic threat. It was an existential exhaustion they did not know if they could bear to face again. Vorlag's gaze drifted from the galactic map to a small, unremarkable yellow star on the far periphery, a system designated only by a string of cold, analytical numbers. A system they had all agreed to ignore. There is one power that did not bleed in the Great War, Vorlag said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it commanded the absolute attention of the chamber. One civilization that felt the tremors of our conflict but did not commit a single ship, did not fire a single shot. General Kalen made a sound of contempt, a low growl from deep within his rocky chest. Humanity, the cowards of Saul, they walled themselves in. While the galaxy burned, they hid behind their orbital shields and their self-imposed silence. They offered no aid. They expressed no solidarity. They are irrelevant, a species of hermits content to watch the universe die from their porch. Or, Lyra countered, her light softening, a species of observers. They saw the greatest war in galactic history unfold and they chose not to participate. Was it cowardice? Or was it wisdom? They husbanded their resources. They developed in isolation. We know nothing of their technological state, their philosophical evolution, their military capacity. We wrote them off as a primitive curiosity 2 centuries ago. To continue to do so now would be an act of profound negligence. Vorlag slowly nodded, his ancient mind sifting through memories of the scant reports they had from before humanity's self-imposed isolation. They were a young species, aggressive, paradoxical, capable of breathtaking acts of creation and horrifying acts of self-destruction. They had reached for the stars with one hand while holding a blade to their own throat with the other. Then, just as the scourge began its final, devastating push, they had simply gone quiet. Their signals ceased. A perimeter of automated sentinels warned off any approach with a simple, endlessly repeating message. The Sol system is under quarantine. Do not approach. We will not respond. The Conclave, fighting for its very existence, had been too preoccupied to force the issue. A neutral system was better than another enemy or another drain on their resources, so they had left them alone. "What would you have us do, Praetor?" Kalen demanded, his anger mixing with a grudging respect for Vorlag's age and experience. "Go to them, hat in hand. Beg the recluses to save us. What could they possibly offer that the combined might of the Conclave does not already possess?" "A different perspective," Vorlag said, the words echoing with a finality that brooked no further argument. "They were not blinded by the fog of war. They were not deafened by the screams of the dying. They watched. They learned. Perhaps they saw something we did not. We stare at this map and see an old enemy, a problem to be solved with firepower. Perhaps they see something else entirely. We have exhausted our strategies. Our pride and our history have led us to this moment, to the return of our greatest fear. It is time we sought counsel from those who have no pride invested in our past mistakes." He turned his gaze to Lyra. "Emissary, you will assemble a delegation. General, you will provide your most disciplined escort, not a war fleet. A diplomatic mission. You will travel to the edge of the Sol system. You will broadcast a message of peaceful intent. You will tell them. You will tell them that the conflict they avoided has returned, and that we, in our victory, may have been the ones to bring it back." The journey to the Sol system was a journey through ghosts. The delegation ship, the Stellar Accord, moved through conclave space, a realm of vibrant nebulae, bustling starports, and hyperlane conduits that pulsed with the light of commerce and communication. It was a testament to the peace they had built from the ashes of the war. But as they neared the Orion Spur, the space around them grew quiet. The lanes grew dark. The chatter of civilization faded into a profound and unnerving silence. This was the periphery, the quarantine zone humanity had established around itself. For centuries, no ship had crossed this line. It was a territory of whispers and legends, a blank spot on the map that every navigator in the galaxy knew to avoid. On the bridge of the Stellar Accord, General Kalen stood with his arms crossed, a monument of impatience. His Kalish honor guards stood like statues behind him, their craggy forms unmoving. He watched the star charts, his expression one of deep skepticism. To him, this was a fool's errand, a desperate pilgrimage to an empty temple. Emissary Lyra's light form hovered near the main view screen, her essence a calm sea of turquoise. She felt the emptiness differently. It wasn't a void. It was a space intentionally, deliberately kept clean. It was the sign of a deep and abiding discipline. Praetor Vorlag had remained with the Conclave, but his presence was felt in the gravity of their mission. He was an observer on this journey, his consciousness linked to Lyra, through a quantum entanglement calm. "We are approaching the termination shock of their star," the Xylo's pilot announced, its voice a series of soft, precise clicks. "The line of their automated sentinels should be here." The crew waited. The tension on the bridge was a coiled spring. According to all historical records, this was the point where the automated warning system should activate. But there was nothing, just the silence and the faint, steady light of the yellow star ahead. "They have deactivated their sentinels," Lyra transmitted to Kalen, her tone one of mild surprise. "Or removed them entirely." "Perhaps their primitive machines finally failed," Kalen grumbled. "Or perhaps they have simply withered away in their isolation, and this entire system is now a tomb." As he spoke, a single soft chime echoed through the bridge. It was a communications request. It was not a blaring alarm, not a military challenge, but a calm, polite, and utterly unexpected invitation. The pilot, startled, looked to Lyra for guidance. Her light pulsed gently. "Accept the communication. Audio only for now." A voice filled the bridge. It was smooth, unaccented, and devoid of any discernible emotion. It was androgynous calm and carried an authority that was chilling in its understatement. "This is United Nations vessel inquiry. You have entered designated Sol-protected space. Please state your name and purpose." Kalen shifted, his stony exterior betraying a flicker of surprise. The language was perfect, unadulterated conclave standard, a dialect that had evolved significantly in the 2 centuries since humanity had gone silent. How had they kept up? Lyra moved forward, her light coalescing slightly. "This is Emissary Lyra of the Luminians, representing the Xylos conclave. We have traveled here on a mission of peace, to seek dialogue with the people of Earth." There was a pause, but it was not a pause of confusion or deliberation. It felt calculated, as if the response was already prepared. "Your peaceful intent is noted, Emissary. We are aware of the reason for your journey. A rendezvous point has been transmitted to your navigation system. Follow the designated coordinates. Do not deviate. The inquiry will meet you there. Over." The line went dead. On the main screen, a set of coordinates glowed softly, indicating a position in the empty space between the orbits of the system's outer gas giants. "They were expecting us," Kalen stated, the obviousness of the fact doing nothing to lessen its impact. "How could they possibly have known?" "They did not hide from the galaxy, General," Lyra replied softly, a dawning realization in her thoughts. "They have been watching, listening, the entire time." The stellar accord adjusted its course, its powerful engines pushing it toward the rendezvous. The human ship that appeared before them was not what any of them had expected. It was not a bristling warship, nor a grand, opulent vessel of state. It was a simple, elegant craft, a seamless white teardrop of a hull with no visible weapons, no ostentatious markings, save for a simple, stylized symbol of a blue circle on a white field. It was smaller than their own ship, but it moved with a grace and precision that spoke of an exquisitely advanced drive system. The name UNS Inquiry was painted in stark black letters along its side. It was a ship built for science, for exploration, for understanding. It was, Kalen thought with a deep sense of unease, the least threatening and most intimidating vessel he had ever seen. A second communication came through, this time with a visual component. A human female appeared on the screen. Her face was pale, framed by dark hair pulled back severely. Her eyes were a cool, intelligent gray, and they surveyed the bridge of the stellar accord with an unnerving placidity. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform, as functional and unadorned as her ship. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova," she said, her voice the same calm, measured tone from the initial hail. "On behalf of the people of Earth and the United Nations of Sol, I welcome you. We have prepared to receive your delegation aboard the Inquiry. Please send a shuttle with no more than 5 individuals. Your honor guard, General Kalen, will be required to leave their weapons with your ship. Our vessel is a place of research, not a battlefield." Kalen's jaw tightened. The request was an affront to his Kalish warrior tradition. To be disarmed was to be shamed. But he saw the look in Lyra's shimmering form and the unspoken command it carried. This was not a negotiation of equals. They were supplicants. He gave a curt, angry nod. The shuttle ride to the Inquiry was silent. Kalen, Lyra, and 3 Xylos aides sat in the opulent transport, the silence amplifying the general's simmering resentment and Lyra's deep curiosity. The airlock of the human ship opened with a near-silent hiss, revealing not a grand reception hall, but a sterile, white corridor. Ambassador Rostova stood there alone, her hands clasped calmly behind her back. "Welcome aboard," she said, her expression unchanging. She gave a slight nod to each of them in turn. Her gaze lingered for a moment on Kalen's towering form, not with fear, but with a kind of detached, analytical interest. "Please follow me." She led them through corridors that were more like a laboratory than a ship of state. There were no decorations, no art, no symbols of power or history. The walls were data screens, some displaying complex equations, others showing stellar phenomena, all in a calm blue and white color scheme. The air was cool, clean, and recycled with an efficiency that was almost sterile. It was a profoundly unsettling environment for beings accustomed to the grandeur and chaos of galactic civilization. They were led into a circular chamber. In the center was a simple, round table. There were no chairs. The far wall was a single, vast window looking out onto the stardusted blackness of space. "We prefer to stand," Rostova said, anticipating their question. "It encourages brevity and focus. Please present your case." Lyra moved to the center of the room. She began her transmission, her thoughts flowing out into the minds of all present, painting a picture of the conclave's fear, of the re-emerging crimson tide of the scourge. She showed them the data from the dead worlds, the energy signatures, the relentless, silent advance. She spoke of the Great War, of their Pyrrhic victory, of their dawning horror that the nightmare had begun again. She ended with Peter Vorlag's hypothesis, that they themselves, in their pride, had somehow caused its return. Throughout her long, impassioned plea, Rostova and the two human aides who had silently joined her simply listened. They did not interrupt. They did not react. Their faces were masks of calm, professional attention. When Lyra finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Kalen felt a surge of frustration. This human impassivity was an insult. He had expected fear or awe or at least a flicker of surprise. He saw nothing. Rostova looked at one of her aides, a young man with sharp, focused eyes. He gave a slight nod. She then turned her gaze back to the delegation. "We thank you for your candor, Emissary Lyra. Your information is thorough. However, it is also incomplete. You have come to us for aid, believing we possess some secret weapon, some forgotten military technology. You are mistaken. We have no such weapons." Kalen let out a short, harsh laugh. "Then this journey was a waste of time. We came here seeking warriors and found only librarians." Rostova's cool gray eyes met his. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in their depths. It was not anger. It was something closer to pity. "A librarian who has read the book can tell you how the story ends, General. You have been fighting a monster in the dark. We chose to turn on the light and study its anatomy." She gestured to the center of the room. A holographic display, far more advanced and detailed than the one in the conclave chamber, sprang to life. It showed the galaxy, but it was overlaid with a web of intricate, shimmering lines, patterns, and calculations. The crimson stain of the scourge was there, but it was rendered not as a simple tide, but as a complex, multi-layered waveform. "For 2 centuries, Rostova began, her voice taking on the tone of a lecturer, "while you were rebuilding, we were observing. We did not seal ourselves away out of fear. We did so to achieve clarity. The Great War was generating too much noise, too much chaos. It was impossible to see the underlying patterns, so we created a quiet space. We turned our entire system into a single, massive sensory array. We watched the scourge. We studied its energy signatures, its methods of propagation, its quantum state. And we came to a conclusion you were too close to the fire to see." She zoomed the hologram in on a single, infected system. The scourge was not shown as a swarm of ships, but as a propagating wave of information. It was a pattern, a resonant frequency that was rewriting matter at a fundamental level. It didn't destroy ships and planets, it converted them. "The scourge is not a species," Rostova said, the words dropping into the silent room with immense weight. "It is not an army of machines or a biological plague in the conventional sense. It is a mimetic contagion, a self-replicating pattern of information that uses matter as its substrate. Think of it as a sound that can turn stone to glass. Your weapons did not destroy it, General. You cannot kill a pattern with explosives. You merely disrupted it. You shattered the glass, but the sound, the underlying frequency, remained, echoing in the void as quantum-level distortions. Dormant, waiting." Lyra's light form flickered intensely. Waiting for what? Rostova's gaze was heavy. She manipulated the hologram, bringing up a detailed schematic of a massive, complex structure. It was instantly recognizable to everyone in the room. The beacon of unity at Cygnus X1. "Every pattern has a resonant frequency," Rostova continued, her voice soft but clear. "A specific energy signature that will cause it to cohere, to amplify, to reform. You, the Xylos Conclave, in your desire to celebrate your victory, built the largest, most powerful, most precisely tuned resonant amplifier in the history of the galaxy, and you placed it at the site of the Scourge's greatest concentration of dormant energy." She overlaid a new data set on the hologram. It showed the energy output of the beacon of unity. The frequency it broadcast, meant to be a symbol of hope and harmony, was a near-perfect match for the Scourge's primary resonant frequency. "You did not stumble upon its return," Ambassador Rostova stated, her voice devoid of accusation, yet her words were the most profound condemnation Kalen had ever heard. "You did not awaken it by accident. You broadcast a galactic summons. You are the architects of your own extinction. You thought the conflict was over. Instead, you took the enemy you had scattered, and with all the power and artistry of your civilization, you carefully and painstakingly brought it back. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a universe holding its breath. Kalen stared at the hologram, at the undeniable, elegant, and horrifying truth it displayed. His pride, his history, his entire identity as a warrior who had stood on the shoulders of victorious ancestors, it all crumbled to dust. The monuments to their victory were, in fact, instruments of their doom. His people had not won the war. They had merely paused it, and then, in their ignorance and arrogance, they had pressed the button to resume it. He felt a coldness spread through his rocky form that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature. It was the cold of shame. Lyra's light pulsed with a sorrow so deep it was almost black. The implications were staggering. Every ship lost, every world that had gone dark in this new wave, their blood was on the Conclave's hands. It was a failure not of arms, but of understanding. A failure of a scale so monumental it defied comprehension. She turned her essence toward Rostova, a silent question emanating from her. What do we do? Rostova seemed to understand. Her calm facade did not break, but her eyes softened with a flicker of something that might have been empathy. A pattern can be reinforced, she said, but it can also be cancelled. You cannot fight a resonance with force. You must fight it with a counter-resonance, a signal of precise, opposing frequency that will destabilize the pattern, causing it to collapse back into incoherent noise. She brought up another schematic on the hologram. It showed a network of devices, small, intricate probes linked together in a vast net. We have designed these resonant dampeners. We do not have the industrial capacity to build them on the scale required. We do not have the fleets to deploy them across the affected sectors. We have the knowledge. You, the Xylos Conclave, have the resources. Together, we may be able to bring silence where there is now a destructive song. The return journey to the Conclave was a somber affair. General Kalen did not speak a single word. He stood on the bridge of the stellar accord, staring into the void, a being of stone seemingly turned to actual stone by the weight of his civilization's failure. He was a warrior without an enemy to fight, only a mistake to rectify. The Scourge was no longer a foe to be met with honor and fire, but a symptom of their own galactic-scale ignorance. Emissary Lyra spent the entire time in a deep meditative trance, her light a dim, sorrowful violet. She was communing with Praetor Vorlag, relaying the terrifying, humbling truth that humanity had revealed. When they arrived, the grand chamber was convened again. The atmosphere was no longer one of defiant tension, but of profound, mournful gravity. Lyra relayed the humans' findings, her thought transmissions painting a stark and undeniable picture of their folly. She projected the human data into the central hologram. The elegant, brutal simplicity of their mistake was laid bare for all to see. The beacon of unity, their proudest creation, pulsing in perfect, deadly harmony with the Scourge's resonant frequency. There were no arguments, there was no dissent. The fire in the Kalish delegates was gone, replaced by a grim, chastened resolve. The Xylos elders seemed to age another century in an instant. The Luminians shimmered with a collective grief that cooled the very air in the chamber. It was General Kalen who finally broke the silence. He stepped forward, his heavy footsteps echoing like funeral drums. He was not addressing the praetor or the emissary, but the entire assembly, the ghosts of their ancestors, and the judgment of history itself. "We were wrong," he said, his voice a low, grating rumble of crushed rock and shattered pride. "Our strength became our blindness, our victory became our arrogance. We built a monument to a war we did not understand, and in doing so we started another. The humans were right. They did not hide. They studied. They learned. While we celebrated our power, they cultivated their wisdom. An act we dismissed as cowardice was, in fact, the ultimate act of strategic discipline." He looked at the faces around him, his own expression a mask of raw humility. "We cannot defeat this threat with our old ways. We must embrace a new one. We must place our trust, our fleets, and our future in the hands of those we once called recluses. We must follow their plan. There is no other path." Praetor Vorlag inclined his ancient head, a gesture of solemn agreement. "The age of the Conclave as the sole guardian of this galaxy is over. It ended the moment we switched on the beacon of unity. A new age begins today, an age of partnership, an age of humility." And so the greatest industrial mobilization in galactic history began. It was not a mobilization for war, but for science. Guided by human schematics transmitted from the UNS Inquiry, the vast factory worlds of the Conclave, which had once churned out warships and cannons, began producing the small, intricate resonant dampeners. Fleets that were once poised for battle were reconfigured into deployment arrays. The greatest military minds of the conclave sat in council not with generals, but with human scientists via Ansible, learning the complex physics of quantum resonance, learning to think not of trajectories and kill ratios, but of frequencies and phase cancellation. Humanity did not send an armada. They sent a handful of ships like the Inquiry, each one a mobile command center and scientific nexus. They did not take command of the conclave fleets, they advised. Ambassador Rostova and her team became the calm, logical center of a frantic, galaxy-spanning effort. They moved with an unnerving efficiency, their lack of panic a steadying influence on the terrified populaces of 100 worlds. They were not saviors riding in on a wave of fire. They were doctors, calmly explaining the procedure required to cure a disease the patient had inflicted upon themselves. The operation was a breathtaking spectacle of coordinated effort. Across thousands of light years, conclave armadas, guided by the quiet voices of human advisors, moved in silent, graceful formations. They were not charging into battle. They were deploying a delicate scientific instrument on a cosmic scale. They placed the dampeners at precise Lagrange points, in the hearts of nebulae, in the orbits of black holes, each location calculated by human analysis to create the perfect, galaxy-spanning network of counter-resonance. General Kalin himself led the Central Fleet, the one tasked with deploying the final array around the Beacon of Unity itself. As his flagship approached the monument, he saw it not as a symbol of pride, but as a testament to his own profound failure. The space around it shimmered with the Scourge's coalescing energy. Ghostly, half-formed biomechanical shapes writhed in the void, drawn to the beacon's song. His old instincts screamed at him to open fire, to blast the abominations to atoms. But he held his ground, his hands steady. He was not a warrior anymore. He was a surgeon, and this required a delicate touch. "All fleets report readiness," he commanded, his voice calm, echoing the humans he had once scorned. From across the sector, confirmations came in. The net was in place. On his view screen, a small window showed Ambassador Rostova's face, as placid as ever, aboard the Inquiry a safe distance away. "The network is stable, General," she said. "The final sequence is in your hands, on your mark." Kalin took a deep breath, the air cycling through his mineral lungs. He was not just giving an order. He was closing a chapter of his people's history, a chapter of arrogant, violent ignorance. "Activate the network, now." There was no explosion, no grand flash of light. There was only a change, a shift in the very fabric of reality. A deep harmonic hum emanated from the thousands of dampeners spread across the galaxy, a single pure note of absolute opposition. The crimson tide on the strategic maps did not shatter. It faded. It dissolved like smoke in the wind. Around the Beacon of Unity, the writhing forms of the Scourge lost their cohesion. They seemed to sigh, to unravel, their complex structures collapsing back into dust, energy, and fundamental particles. The malevolent, resonant song that had haunted the galaxy for centuries was replaced by a profound and cleansing silence. It was over. The victory was quiet, elegant, and absolute. It was a victory of mathematics, of physics, of understanding. A victory born not from the courage to fight, but from the wisdom to listen. In the aftermath, a new sense of purpose settled over the conclave. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, determined humility. The partnership with humanity was solidified, no longer an emergency measure, but the foundation of a new galactic order. The Beacon of Unity was not destroyed, but repurposed. Under human guidance, it was being transformed from a resonant amplifier into a listening post, an instrument to study the deep mysteries of the universe. It was from this repurposed beacon that the final, most chilling revelation came. Weeks after the Scourge had been silenced, the UNS Inquiry remained in orbit, conducting a deep analysis of the residual quantum echoes, the faint informational ghosts left behind by the collapsed pattern. Ambassador Rostova requested a private audience with Praetor Vorlag and the highest echelons of the new Conclave Humanity Council. They met not in the Grand Chamber, but in the quiet, sterile conference room of the Inquiry, the same room where the Conclave's shame had been laid bare. Rostova stood before the holographic display, her expression, for the first time, betraying a trace of something other than calm professionalism. It was a look of profound, solemn awe. "We were correct in our analysis of the Scourge," she began, her voice low. "It was a resonant pattern, but we were wrong about its purpose. We, like you, assumed it was a weapon, a mindless contagion. It was not. We have spent the last week sifting through the noise, analyzing the base code of the pattern itself. It was incredibly corrupted, degraded by millennia of propagation and the chaotic energies of your war. But when we filtered out the noise, when we reconstructed the original signal, we found that it was not a weapon at all. She gestured to the hologram. A complex string of data appeared, shifting and resolving. It was a message, she said softly, a warning and a memory. The data resolved into images, into language, into the last will and testament of a civilization so ancient it predated the Xylos themselves. A civilization that had faced an enemy not at the edge of their territory, but at the edge of their reality. The scourge was their last desperate act, Rostova explained, her voice filled with a reverence for the long-dead species. They were being consumed by something, a force they called the Great Silence, a force that did not convert matter but erased it, a wave of absolute null existence advancing from the intergalactic void. They could not fight it, they could not understand it, so they encoded their existence, their knowledge, their warning into a self-replicating pattern. They became the scourge. They sacrificed their physical forms to create an informational wave, hoping it would propagate faster than the silence and warn other galaxies of the coming doom. Praetor Vorlag felt a coldness that dwarfed what Kalen had felt. The scourge, the monster that had haunted his people's nightmares for centuries, the existential threat that had defined their history, had been a victim. It was a refugee, a garbled, terrified scream echoing through the ages. Their war against it had not been a war against an invader, but the act of shooting a messenger because his news was terrifying. Rostova pointed to the edge of the holographic map, to the vast, dark emptiness between their galaxy and the next. A faint, almost imperceptible distortion was visible in the deep-field sensor readings, a frontier where the light of distant galaxies seemed to just end, abruptly. The message was corrupted over time, she said. The warning became a weapon. The attempt to preserve life became a pattern that consumed it, a tragedy of cosmic proportions. The warning, however, remains. The Great Silence is real, and it is coming. The scourge was not the war. It was merely the alarm bell ringing in a house that refused to wake up. The assembled leaders, human and alien alike, stared at the map. Their galaxy, once a vast and endless empire, suddenly felt impossibly small, fragile. A single island of light in an encroaching ocean of absolute darkness. The conflict they thought was over had merely been an introduction to a far older, far greater one. The enemy they had brought back had, in its own terrible way, saved them by forcing them to finally listen, to finally understand. Praetor Vorlag looked at Ambassador Rostova, at the calm, logical, and deeply empathetic face of humanity. The species that had hidden from their war was now the only one capable of preparing them for the true one. Their long silence had not been an act of fear, but of preparation for a threat the rest of the galaxy hadn't even known existed. "What do we do?" Vorlag asked, the ancient praetor's voice now that of a student. Rostova's gaze met his, her gray eyes reflecting the starfield behind her. "Now," she said, her voice the calm at the heart of an approaching storm, "we get to work together."